Hello, and welcome to Sci-Fi Christian Book Reviews, brought to you by the Sci-Fi I am Ben DeBono, here to talk to you today about Clive Barker's classic horror novel, The Hellbound Heart. Rather a grim title, if I do say so myself, though an appropriate one for the subject matter. I've never read Clive Barker before. He's one of those authors where I've thought about reading him because I do enjoy horror novels, and just never have checked him out. And then a few weeks ago, I think, this book was on sale for the Kindle through Amazon. So decided, okay, I can spend $2 to check him out. And so I bought it and read it this last week. I didn't know at the time that I'd bought it that this was the basis for the film Hellraiser, which I have also never seen, as well as its 8 sequels, I believe. Thankfully, the book does not have 8 sequels, but I guess the movie franchise does, and a remake or whatever. So it's been turned into one of those endless horror movie series, a la Freddy, Jason, Halloween, and now I guess we have Paranormal Activity, which is up to 5 or 6 or whatever. And to be honest, as much as I love horror, I don't really care for that sort of thing. I mean, I thought the first Saw movie was moderately intelligent and interesting. I never bothered to see any of the sequels. Have no desire to see them. I've seen, 1 or 2 of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, 1 or 2 of the Friday the 13th. So, I've seen a few, but it's really not an interesting genre to me with the endless horror movie sequel or whatever you'd call it, because so often it's just about, gore and the thrills of that, which I have nothing against a gory movie. But just gore for gore's sake is, ultimately pretty vapid as much as anything for anything's sake, if there's no deeper meaning behind it. Not that interested. So after I read the book, or after I bought the book and before I read it, I figured out that it was the basis for Hellraiser, mostly because on the cover of the Kindle version, there's the kind of the outline of Pinhead. I was like, hey, that monster looks a little familiar. I think I've seen him somewhere before, so I figured it out. And then I was a little bit wary about the book. It's like, is this going to suck? Because it's just going to be it's the basis for one of these never-ending horror franchises. I don't really want to deal with that, but it was short enough, and I wanted to read Clive Barker, so I decided to give it a shot anyway. And I was very pleasantly surprised. This is an unexpectedly intelligent and thoughtful novel. No clue if that is reflected in any of the movies, though I'll probably at least watch the first one. I doubt I'll watch any of the others, but I'll probably at least watch the first one. But this is a very thoughtful novel. It's not perfect. I'll get into some of its flaws in just a second here. But there's a lot to chew on in this book, and a lot of worthwhile things that it has to say. Now, how does that line up with kind of my perception of the never-ending film franchise? Well, again, without having seen any of the movies, I don't know how much of an overlap there is. The one thing that strikes me as very odd is that I guess that monster I referenced, Pinhead, I believe he's called in the movies, I think he's in one scene in the book. And I think he speaks once. So I'm not quite sure how this extraordinarily minor character became the face of the Hellraiser franchise. But there you have it. Maybe they changed things drastically for the movie. I don't know. I don't really care that much. But the book certainly doesn't resemble what you would expect from a Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street type of movie. Let me talk about some of the flaws first, get those out of the way, and then I want to talk about some of what is thoughtful and worthwhile in this book. Probably the main flaw lies in the characters. The characters are very one-dimensional in this book. There's some exceptions along the way, but given the relatively short length of this, it's like a 150-page novel, Barker does not do a great job of fleshing out those characters. There are some authors who are able to give us good character development in a short book. At least in this instance, he is not one of them. I don't know if characters are his strong point in any of his other works, but they're certainly the weak point here. It feels like there's a lot of narrative shortcuts that Barker does to get us to the horror scenes and to the plot that he wants to tell, which is fine. I get that he, especially since he has themes he wants to talk about, I'm okay with him pushing the plot in a particular direction. It just sometimes felt a little bit lazy, or a little bit like, well, I don't quite understand this character's motivation for doing this here. She doesn't have a reason yet for doing an action this extreme that pushes us into the real horror of what's going on in the story. So there's some stuff like that. And it bugged me. It detracts from the novel. I think it is significant enough where I would not call this a classic piece of genre fiction. It's classic in the sense that it's influential, but not extremely well written. However, that said, there are moments of greatness in this book. Sometimes Barker's prose is very lyrical, very thoughtful. He can be a very intelligent author. And so it's really a mixed bag in terms of the writing a little bit. But I'm willing to forgive that a lot because of how thoughtful this book is throughout. It does a lot of exploring how closely related opposites are. In the very first scene we meet this character Frank, who, due to his pursuit of absolute pleasure, winds up in hell, basically, and is his own undoing. He winds up being tortured by these demon-like characters, the Cenobites, who he summons in the first chapter of the book, so I'm not giving anything away that you can't get in the first 5 pages. And he summons them because he's been told that they will give you absolute pleasure. He feels like he's a hedonist turned nihilist who has seemingly exhausted every source of pleasure on earth, and so he's turning to the supernatural for pleasure, which I'm willing to go along with. I mean, that's the hook for the novel. And because of that choice, he winds up in hell. The pursuit of pleasure leads him quite literally to hell because he experiences pleasure so extreme that it's actually painful. And it's a very thoughtful, if not overly complex theme. Especially the way Barker draws it out. It's very significant that in that first scene, the Cenobites, after they're summoned, tell Frank, look, we'll do this for you, but you can't back out once you agree to come with us for this absolute pleasure, and you might not like it when you get it. And that moment to me where Frank says, okay, yeah, fine, I'm in, no matter what, is very telling in terms of how we think about hell, especially how we as Christians in the postmodern age think about what is often, and I don't know if Clive Barker's a Christian, but reflecting for myself, where hell's often a very uncomfortable topic for Christians these days. And, I certainly hope and pray that nobody is there, but I also believe that if there are people there, they're there because they ultimately chose it in some way. As C.S. Lewis says, that I think he has the great quote in Mere Christianity, where if we as humans don't say to God, thy will be done, God will eventually say to us, thy will be done. And to me, this is a narrative outworking, and again, I don't know if Clive Barker ever read C.S. Lewis or had heard the quote or anything, but it's a narrative outworking of that idea. Very powerfully explored. He gets into this whole sense of how intemperance ultimately leads to our own undoing. And again, to quote C.S. Lewis, I'm reading Mere Christianity with some friends right now, so it's kind of on my mind. But C.S. Lewis talks about how temperance isn't, this don't ever drink, don't ever smoke, all that stuff we usually talk about it. But temperance is, the quote he has is, It is doing something as much as it ought to be done and no farther. It's enjoying something as much as it ought to be enjoyed, no more, no less. That's what temperance is. So he uses the example of alcohol in Mere Christianity, that temperance isn't abstaining from alcohol, it's enjoying it in its proper sense. And what we see in Barker's novel are characters who have no concept of temperance. They pursue that which is good in and of itself in an intemperate way, and it's ultimately their own undoing. It destroys them, it destroys the people around them. And again, not a complex theme. We're not breaking new intellectual ground here, but it's well explored in the novel. It's very thoughtful. It makes you reflect. And that's what I want from a good novel like this. That's what horror ought to be. To me, there's always the age-old question of, well, should Christians read horror? Which is just ridiculous. I mean, of course they should, if they would like to. Because horror helps us to explore some of these things. How do we make our own personal hell? What does that mean for our sins to be visited upon us? And the horror genre at its best is about exploring those types of questions. And character plot issues aside, Barker does an amazing job of exploring exactly that type of thing in this book. So I'm going to give it 3.5, 4 stars. I'll round it up to 4. Because I really value that, some of the writing issues aside, how thoughtful it is. So I'll give it 4 stars. I do recommend it. Yes, it's graphic, so, not for the faint of heart, but, if you can stomach that, it's well worth reading. And I will definitely be revisiting or visiting some of Barker's stuff in the future. I'd definitely like to read some more. One last fun note, more as a trivia thing. This book was originally published in an anthology with 2 other horror novels called Night Visions. I think it was Night Visions Volume 3, edited by none other than Mr. George R.R. Martin himself back in the 80s, 70s, something like that. So, nice bit of connection. Well before George R.R. Martin enjoyed the fame and prestige that he is now getting, he was busy editing this novel and did quite a good job, if I do say so myself. So anyway, Hellbound Heart by Clive Barker. Good novel. Good novel. Not perfect, but very good. Worth your time. 4 stars out of 5. So that's all for now. This is Sci-Fi Christian Book Reviews, and I am Ben Bono.